Welcome to Psyche Talks. Today, we're exploring something really common, something many of us grapple with, maybe without quite knowing what to call it.
Yeah.
It's the lasting impact of growing up with emotionally immature parents.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic that, well, it pops up everywhere once you start to see it, doesn't it? Shaping not just childhood, but our relationships, our interactions, like way into adulthood.
Yeah.
So our goal in this deep dive really is to get to grips with what this looks like. How do you spot the signs,
Yeah.
and the patterns we might be living out?
Right.
And crucially, map out some kind of path toward maybe emotional freedom and healthier connections.
Okay. And we're drawing on a lot of material here, right? Extensive research, clinical experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Decades of it, packed with really powerful observations, insights, and stories. Real life stuff.
And some of these stories might sound pretty familiar to listeners, I imagine.
Oh, definitely. Think of this as maybe getting some needed clarity.
Yeah.
Those baffling, sometimes frustrating family interactions.
Mhm.
And maybe understanding that feeling.
Yeah.
That kind of persistent emotional loneliness.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Emotional loneliness, because the source material says it's not just like existential angst, is it?
No, not usually. It often stems directly from that experience of not being truly seen or heard or responded to emotionally as a child.
Okay. So what is emotional intimacy then, in contrast?
Well, the way it's described is that feeling of safety, you know, where you can share anything, your fears, your joys, the messy stuff.
Without being judged.
Exactly, being seen, known, accepted, which is, well, it's a stark contrast to growing up with parents who might have been great at providing physical things, food, clothes, a roof.
The practical stuff.
Right. But we're just fundamentally absent on that deeper emotional level.
And that feeling, that gap, it doesn't just magically disappear when you leave home.
That at all. It can absolutely follow you. It shows up in repeated relationship patterns, maybe, where you feel that same disconnect, that same uh, loneliness.
But you don't know why.
Exactly. You don't understand the root cause tracing back.
Okay, so if this is ringing bells for someone listening, how do they start to, recognize it more clearly?
Well, the first step, and this is really key, is trying to look at your parents and your history with objective eyes.
Which is hard.
Oh, incredibly hard. But the goal isn't blame. It's really about understanding their limitations, seeing them for who they actually are,
Yeah.
not just who you needed them to be back then.
Okay, so what are we looking for?
The source gives a really helpful framework, almost like a checklist,
Right.
of characteristics.
Like what?
Things like maybe they overreact to really minor things,
Hmm.
like disproportionately,
Okay.
or a consistent lack of empathy, or just seeming unaware of how others are feeling.
Right. And maybe a discomfort with emotions generally, like if things get too close or intense.
Spot on. A clear discomfort with emotional closeness. They might get visibly irritated or defensive if you just have a different point of view,
Mm-hmm.
even on small things.
Hmm.
And this one's tricky. They might confide in you, like you're their therapist or best friend.
Use you as a sounding board?
Yeah. But then when you need support, when you need someone to listen to your feelings, they're completely unavailable.
Wow. Okay. What else?
Behaviors that just seem thoughtless, acting without really considering the impact on others.
Mm-hmm.
Often there's inconsistency. You never quite know which version of them you're going to get day to day.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. And think about how they handle upset. If you were distressed or sad as a kid, what was the response? Was it just superficial, like a quick, oh, there?
Or did it turn into annoyance?
Or irritation,
Yeah.
sarcasm, maybe even anger? And conversations.
Yeah.
Do they always seem to circle back to their interests? Is it hard for them to show genuine curiosity about your life?
They can be really defensive too, right? If you disagree.
Hugely defensive.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's this tendency to diminish your successes. Maybe they see it as a threat, or they just genuinely don't know how to celebrate you. And they might just dismiss facts or logic if it doesn't fit their opinion. Fundamentally, there's often a real lack of self-reflection. No taking accountability for their actions or their impact.
So these aren't just like bad days.
No. The source really emphasizes these are often deep, unconscious personality patterns. And a crucial insight is their lack of awareness. They often genuinely don't see how their behavior affects other people, especially the children relying on them for emotional guidance.
Okay, that makes sense, but it's still hard to grasp sometimes. Why? Why are they this way? What's going on underneath?
Well, the research points pretty strongly to their own pasts. Very often, they grew up in environments where emotions were, like, shut down, or
What
punished.
so?
Maybe their own parents struggled with substance abuse, or there was significant loss, abuse, trauma, or even just those old school parenting styles where showing feelings was seen as weakness.
Right. Stiff upper lip kind of thing.
Exactly. So they weren't given the space or the tools to actually process and integrate their own feelings growing up.
So it's not just that they lack the skills.
Mm.
They might actually be afraid of emotions.
Precisely. The source uses the term affect phobia, a phobia of feeling things, especially intense emotions or mixed feelings.
Huh. Affect phobia.
Yeah. And that fear, it kind of stunts their self-development. It locks them into this state of emotional immaturity.
And that fear then shows up in those traits we just talked about.
It does. Because they're scared of their own inner world, they tend to live subjectively. Their feelings trump facts or objective reality.
Okay.
They struggle with differences because disagreement feels like rejection, like a threat. They can seem very egocentric.
Self-absorbed.
Yeah, but it's often less about true narcissism and more about this intense anxiety-driven self-preoccupation. They're constantly scanning everything based on their own insecurities.
So everything relates back to them.
Right, self-referential, but they rarely turn that gaze inward to actually understand themselves, not self-reflective.
So their emotional world is kind of fragile. And these behaviors are like defenses.
You got it.
Mm.
Defenses against feeling vulnerable or out of control. Their emotions tend to be intense, but also kind of shallow and reactive.
Mm-hmm.
And they really struggle with mixed feelings. Everything's black or white, emotionally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So they tend to focus on what's tangible, what they can see, what they can fix physically.
Ah, okay. So maybe they're super attentive if you break your arm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that's concrete. It's a problem they can do something about. But if you come to them with complex emotional pain,
They check out.
they might become distant,
Mhm.
dismissive, even agitated, because they just lack the capacity to handle it. The source even calls them killjoys sometimes.
Killjoys. Why?
Because their own discomfort with genuine positive emotion, like excitement or deep joy, can actually dampen it in others around them.
Wow. Okay, so that paints a picture of them. But what does it actually feel like being on the receiving end as a child or even as an adult child?
Oh, it's consistently described as lonely, deeply lonely,
Mm-mm.
frustrating, feeling fundamentally unseen, unheard,
Like you have to hide parts of yourself.
constantly, feeling like you have to shut down, shut out, or shut up about your real feelings because they just aren't welcome or they won't be understood. You keep trying, maybe, to connect, hoping this time will be different,
But you just end up feeling invisible.
invisible, or unheard. Yeah.
And the communication must be incredibly difficult.
Oh, definitely. The source talks about a narrow window of attention.
Hmm.
Like you have to get your point across super quickly and simply, or you just lose them.
Mm.
And there's that classic frustrating expectation of mind reading, if you really loved me.
You just know what I want, yeah, without me having to say it.
Exactly. And because they can't tolerate that messy emotional processing, they really resist repairing relationships after conflict.
What does that look like?
They might just act like nothing happened, sweep it under the rug. Or demand immediate forgiveness, just get over it, without any real attempt to understand your hurt or take responsibility.
Skipping the hard part.
Totally. Skipping the actual repair work.
Yeah.
And there's often this demand for mirroring. Instead of seeing you as a separate person with your own feelings, your own life, they expect you to reflect their moods, their expectations, their reality.
And if you don't?
Friction. Significant friction. This is where some of those examples from the source are so powerful.
Right.
Like Cynthia. Her mother cut her off simply because Cynthia made independent life choices that didn't fit her mother's vision. It wasn't about harm. It was about not mirroring.
Wow. Or Jeff, right, asking his dad for homework help.
Yes, and the father just explodes in rage and insults. Not about the homework, really.
Yeah.
It was triggered by his own insecurity about competence projected right onto Jeff.
So this isn't healthy closeness at all. It's something else.
Right. The source makes a clear distinction between emotional intimacy and what it calls enmeshment.
Enmeshment. Okay.
Enmeshment is like this blurred system. It's based on dependency, on playing specific roles, not on a genuine connection between two separate whole individuals. It prioritizes predictability, keeping the system stable, over the actual growth or needs of the people in it.
Okay. So, faced with all this, kids don't just sit there, right? They adapt. They cope.
Absolutely. They develop these really clever, though ultimately quite limiting, coping mechanisms. The source highlights two big ones: healing fantasies and role selves.
Healing fantasies. That sounds like hoping things will get better.
Kind of. There are these subconscious beliefs, these hopes, that your unmet needs will eventually be met, often by the parent changing. If I'm just good enough, or if I just try harder, they'll finally see me, that kind of thing.
Ah, okay. And role cells.
That's when you construct an identity. You become something other than your authentic self to try and get attention or approval or just a sense of belonging in that difficult family system.
Like being the responsible
Or
one.
the easy child, the clown, the caretaker, the achiever, whatever seems to work, or at least causes the least friction.
And these strategies tend to fall into a couple of broad styles.
Yeah, the source talks about two main coping styles, internalizers and externalizers.
Okay, internalizers first. What's their deal?
Internalizers are the kids who tend to assume problems are their fault. They look inward, asking, what did I do wrong? They often hide their distress, become very private with their pain,
But they're often really perceptive, aren't they?
incredibly perceptive,
Mm-hmm.
super sensitive to the emotional atmosphere, constantly scanning, trying to read the room, avoid upsetting anyone.
Mm.
They have this deep, deep need for connection,
Mm.
but they can feel almost apologetic about having needs at all. They might think, oh, it's just me, I'm being too sensitive, or it's silly to be upset about this.
Like crying over spilled milk.
Exactly, that phrase comes up. And this often leads to them becoming sort of invisible, easy to neglect, or they develop this intense, I can handle it myself independence.
Which wasn't really a choice.
No, it was a necessity.
Yeah.
And the source notes, internalizers might not even recognize emotional neglect or abuse for what it is because they're so conditioned to blame themselves or because it wasn't overt physical stuff.
Mm.
And they often end up doing all the emotional heavy lifting in relationships later on, which leads to, burnout, resentment, exhaustion.
Yeah, you can see that in examples like Sandra, right? Protecting her brother on the bus.
Yeah, becoming the little adult because no one else was stepping up. Or Leah hiding her sadness because her mom got irritated by tears. Or that woman who felt totally unseen by her family, even with big accomplishments, feeling like they were just never on the same wavelength emotionally.
Okay. And externalizers. Briefly.
They're kind of the opposite pattern. They
Yeah.
tend to project problems outward, blame others. Their pain is usually more visible, acting out, impulsivity, maybe volatility. They might wrongly accuse others.
So internalizers turn blame inward, externalizers turn it outward. But either way, it's a survival strategy.
Exactly. Developed to navigate that difficult emotional landscape.
Okay, so if someone listening recognizes themselves in these patterns, the striving, the invisibility, the exhaustion, what's the way forward, how do you start to break free?
Well, the source calls this phase a necessary breaking down and awakening. It sounds dramatic, but
But it's positive.
it can be. Those symptoms people might be experiencing, maybe depression, anxiety, chronic muscle tension, even physical issues, they can actually be signals
Signals of what?
that the old coping strategies, those role selves, those healing fantasies, they just aren't working anymore. Your true self, the one you had to push down, is trying to get your attention. It's waking up.
And anger comes into this too, right?
Oh, yeah. Processing anger related to that past neglect is often a really critical and actually empowering part of this awakening.
Empowering. Anger often feels bad.
It can. But in this context, it's recognizing that anger is a valid, healthy response to having your emotional life force kind of stifled or ignored, just so someone else could prioritize their own comfort or needs.
Right.
There's a quote from someone called Jade in the source material saying something like, there would be something wrong with me if I weren't angry. It's very empowering. I don't want to live a lie anymore.
That's powerful.
It really is. And this is where the big shift happens. Instead of pouring energy into that healing fantasy, trying to fix or change your parents.
Which likely won't happen.
Right. The focus moves squarely onto self-care. Learning to trust your own instincts, your own feelings, your own reality, you start to let go of the fantasy that they will change.
And that allows you to see them more clearly.
Yes, more realistically.
Yeah.
Not through that idealized childhood lens anymore.
Yeah.
You might realize, like Patsy in the source, that, hey, I'm actually the most emotionally mature person in this dynamic.
And that's okay.
It's more than okay. It's a testament to your own growth, your resilience. It's not being disloyal to acknowledge their limitations and your own strengths.
Okay. So once you've had this kind of awakening, how do you actually relate to them or anyone else showing these traits? It sounds tricky.
It is tricky. Letting go of that deep wish for them to be different is, well, it's a process. But the source offers a really practical approach. It draws on family systems theory, mentioning Marie Bowen's work specifically. It's called the maturity awareness approach, combined with detached observation.
Detached observation. Sounds a bit cold.
It can feel that way at first.
Hmm.
But it's not really about being cold or cutting them off, though sometimes limiting contact is necessary for self-preservation. It's more about managing the interaction from a place of emotional self-protection.
Okay.
The goal isn't trying to get that deep emotional intimacy from them anymore because you recognize they likely can't provide it. The goal is navigating the interaction while protecting your own emotional space, your own sense of self.
So how do you do that practically?
Well, key components are express yourself clearly, say your truth, state your need or boundary, and this is the hard part, let go of the outcome. Let go of needing a specific reaction from them.
Focus on getting your truth out, not changing their response.
Exactly. And focus on the desired outcome of that specific interaction. What do you actually want to achieve? Get information, set a limit, share some news. Focus on that, not on trying to fix the underlying relationship quality, because that's limited by their capacity.
Right. Manage the interaction itself?
Yes. Actively manage it. Control the duration. Keep visits or calls brief if you need to. Stay on topic. Gently guide the conversation back if it veers into their usual self-focused loops. And crucially, try to stay calm and observational. That's the detached observation part.
Observing the dynamic instead of getting sucked in.
Precisely. It's the opposite of falling back into your old rolling. Self, the pleaser, the fixer, the invisible one. You're using your thinking brain to watch what's happening, both in them and in yourself, without getting swept away by their reactivity or your own old emotional triggers.
Maintaining your own thoughts and feelings.
Yes. Bowen called it differentiation. Keeping a grip on yourself even when things get intense. It stopped you from getting pulled into their emotional stuff or feeling compelled to play that old expected role. Like Rose's story in The Source, stepping out of being the good daughter finally allowed her to just be herself.
They might feel weird at first, though. Like you said, maybe cold or even devious.
Yeah, people do report feeling that initially, but reframing it as self-preservation, as maintaining your own individual thought and integrity can really help. You're protecting your inner state.
And the source mentioned something interesting that sometimes, if the adult child stops needing their approval and acts more independently...
Sometimes, yes. The parent might respond with a bit more politeness or reasonableness, simply because the old dynamics, the old buttons they used to push, aren't working anymore.
But you can't count on that.
Absolutely not. It cannot be the goal or the expectation. Their fundamental fear of genuine intimacy usually hasn't changed.
Okay. And this whole approach, it also gives you permission to set limits, right?
Huge permission, which feels incredibly freeing, even if it comes with a side of guilt initially. You gain the freedom to choose how much contact is healthy for you, how much emotional energy you're willing to give, and yes, even to suspend contact entirely, if that's what's needed for your own well-being. Like Brad's tough decision about his mother moving in, or Aisha realizing she had to break contact.
And realizing your goodness isn't tied to how much you give, especially to people who can't really receive it or reciprocate.
Exactly. Setting limits isn't selfish. It's self-respect. It's necessary.
And there's that question the source poses. Am I needing this from them now, or is this an old childhood need playing out?
That's such a powerful question. Rebecca's story really highlights it. She was so caught up in wanting her mother to feel better, this old childhood hope, even when her mother showed no interest in changing. Recognizing that frees you. You realize you can take action on your own behalf. You can meet your own needs or find other people who can meet them.
Okay, so this whole journey, understanding the immaturity, seeing your own patterns, focusing on your own growth, it also helps you figure out what healthy relationships actually look like.
It's a massive benefit. Because honestly, adult children of emotionally immature parents can sometimes struggle with that. They might be drawn to familiar dynamics, even unhealthy ones, mistaking chaos or intensity for excitement because, well, it feels familiar.
Right. So what should we look for? What does emotional maturity look like in others?
Well, mature people can balance objective thinking with deep emotional connection. They're independent, they have their own lives, but they're also capable of secure, deep attachment.
Yeah.
They tend to be direct and honest, but not exploitative. They have a clear, pretty stable sense of who they are.
Comfortable with feelings, their own and others.
Yes. Comfortable and honest with their own feelings and able to handle the feelings of others without getting overwhelmed or shutting down. They generally have good empathy, good impulse control, good emotional intelligence. They're genuinely interested in your inner life, your thoughts and feelings, and they enjoy sharing their own too.
They don't shy away from tough stuff.
No, they tend to deal with problems realistically, directly. They don't avoid difficult conversations just because they're uncomfortable. And they can tolerate mixed emotions. They see nuances, that people and situations aren't just all good or all bad. They resonate empathetically.
And a really big one must be accountability.
Huge. A key difference is their ability to repair relationships after conflict. They can take accountability for their part, understand cause and effect over time. They often have a more secure attachment history themselves, though not always, and they're willing to self-reflect, to learn from past experiences.
Okay. So the source encourages us to develop these kinds of values and attitudes in ourselves too, right? Even if we didn't have those role models.
Absolutely. It's about making a conscious choice now, as an adult, choosing to act from your true self, getting clear on your needs and learning to communicate them, accepting limits, yours and other people's, recognizing that mistakes happen, and practicing self-compassion.
Letting go of expecting mind reading.
Definitely. Using your hurt feelings not as proof you're flawed, but as valuable signals pointing to unmet needs. And then practicing asking for what you need, clearly, maybe repeatedly if necessary, and, importantly, giving yourself permission to end interactions when you're tired or they just aren't feeling right.
You might not have learned this stuff growing up.
But the powerful message is you absolutely can learn and develop these skills and values now.
So wrapping this up, what's the core takeaway here?
I think the big picture is that understanding these dynamics of emotional immaturity isn't really about diagnosing your parents or assigning blame. It's more like getting a new lens, one that brings clarity to all those confusing, frustrating interactions, past and present.
It helps you see them objectively, as limitations in them, not flaws in you.
Exactly. Recognizing these patterns and the coping strategies you had to develop, that's the key that unlocks you from self-blame, from that persistent emotional loneliness. You start to realize, oh, it wasn't that I was unlovable. It was about their incapacity.
And there's freedom in that realization.
Immense freedom. The freedom to stop living by those old roles and fantasies, to step more fully into your authentic self, and to consciously choose relationships going forward, ones that actually nourish you, support you, see you.
It sounds like finding power in acceptance.
Yeah, a quiet power. In radical acceptance, maybe, accepting yourself, flaws and all, accepting others for who they really are, including their limitations. And from that clear, grounded place, choosing your own path. Thank you for your support and for listening.